What's good, guys? Scoobert Dubert here, about to have an awesome conversation with Eliott Glinn, who is a mix engineer. And if you know me, I love talking to mix engineers because they have such a unique perspective on the whole musical process. They are the ones that take all those individual tracks that you lay down in the recording studio, meld them together, and create that stereo output final audio file. They're the ones that take like all the ingredients and turn it into soup. They're the ones that create the final song that feels like a song, like a package, like a done thing. That's the mix engineer, and I love it because they are straddling both the technical side of all of the filtering and frequencies and mid-side and all this nonsense that we love. But really, mostly, it's the artistic side, trying to pull the artistic vision out of the song and highlight the things that need to be highlighted. It's like, oh, there's a cool bass part here. I'm going to figure out the technical tools to be able to make that bass part really sing and feel supported by the rest of the instruments. Or vice versa. Like, when does the bass need to step into the background and the guitars, like, step to the front of the stage? Those are all the things that the mix engineer is kind of like creating with this beast. And I love talking with people like Eliott because he thinks in a very similar way that I do about music and about frequencies, and doing all of that at the same time is really hard. And I love talking about it because it's like it's an ephemeral art. It's not something that is like, here's the textbook, now go do it. Everybody's going to do a mix differently, and they can both be right. I love that. But before we get into that conversation, I would love to invite you to check out our presenting sponsor, DistroKid. The coolest thing about this is that you get a 30% off discount using our code, which is the best thing in town. DistroKid, what is it? DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists keep 100% of royalties and earnings. So I love this because I put out a ton of music. I want to keep the money I make from my music. Great partner. So if you want to use our link, it is distrokid.com/VIP/love-music-more. Distrokid.com, VIP, love music more. You get 30% off. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all the major streaming services. I think it's really cool to be able to get it into the socials so that people can like make a dance video or something using your song, and then you're going to get paid a little bit because you're going through DistroKid. One of the other things that I think is really cool is you can easily pay your collaborators. So I do a lot of collabs, and I'm not an accountant. I don't want to be an accountant, so I use their splits tool as often as I can to be able to send it to other people with DistroKid accounts, just like they do it, they handle it. You can also send big files to anyone. I love doing this with instant share, and they've got like a backup of all of my music too, which is just a nice thing to like, let me breathe a little easier. I've got my backup, so that's an extra one, a little vault. And then there's also like other really cool little tools. They've got a Spotify canvas generator, a hyper follow page that can have all your different links, like little landing pages for yourself. And you can send credits to the stores, which I've been doing, and I love it because someday Spotify is going to have a longer list of credits, but other services do. So when people want to see, like who was singing backup vocals on this Scoobert song, it's like, boom, Lou Roy. And the way that I was able to make that connection and put that in the metadata was through DistroKid. So sign up today, 30% off using our code distrokid.com/VIP/love-music-more. It's the way to go. Well, enjoy the episode. What's good, everybody? This is Scoobert Dubert. Welcome back to Love Music More. I'm joined with Eliott Glinn. What's up? How you doing?
Hey, buddy.
We're going to talk about mixing, creating emotive mixes, being able to pull the best out of artists, and releasing music that you can be proud of. So, how are you doing, Eliott? Let's dig into this.
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully can share some wisdom, some experience for people can take away and kind of see the other side of the glass and how mix engineers, or myself anyway, kind of navigate this career and what I do.
I love mixing because it is, to so many artists, it's kind of this thing that's like, I give them my music and it comes out, and now it sounds like a record. And it's like, how did it get from A to Z?
Yeah.
So I just like to first kind of start off with, how do you define mixing? Like what is, if somebody goes, I don't know what they do, I just send them files and it comes back a song. Like how would you define, just at a super zoomed out level, kind of what you do?
Yeah, my kind of thing I always tell people is, artists and bands record their music, whether it's at home or in a studio. They send it to me, and I just make it sound good.
Cool.
You would think that, going into a studio and recording your song, it should come out amazing straight away out of the microphone, but it's not. There's a whole extra step. That's where mixing comes in, then mastering, and it's just making all those individual tracks that you've slaved over and got as good as you can to translate across multiple different playback systems, make sure all the emotion and the intent that you have in the song is portrayed, and that basically there's nothing in there where it makes somebody go, hang on a minute, that sounds a bit weird, or that sounds a bit odd. Kind of a mixer's job should be invisible to the end listener. If you've done a good job, people won't be sure you've done anything at all, I think is a good way of putting it.
I like that. And that's sometimes the way that I mix too, is like, if there's ever any moment that snags me, it's not done yet,
Yeah, that's it. That's the kind of thing. A lot of people, when they first start out mixing, they're like, oh, how do you know a mix is done? Or, what's your process for finishing a song? I don't know when it's finished. And that's exactly it. It's like, if I play it and sit back and listen and nothing waves its hand going, hey, sort me out, then we're done. But on the same side of that, you could keep going and going and going. So there is a point where you have to be restrained and be like, okay, although I could end up tweaking for hours on end here, this is a point where the song is good and I should just leave it alone, because I'm sure have a similar thing where you just go down a rabbit hole and you can make things a lot worse that way. So yeah, there's some restraint involved for sure.
I like that. It is endless. And that's also part of the reason why I find it such an interesting part of like what we do, is that there's not necessarily always a right decision. There's a right for the song decision. And then there's also like, you did too much decision. So it's an interesting navigation. And we were just talking about like illness before the pod, and mixing is like another, like, it's like a humbling thing, especially in the beginning. But every tune that you come to is like, this is a new mountain to climb. This is a new challenge. You develop techniques, you develop skills, you develop your intuition, but you have to apply it like from the jump, from zero, yet again.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. You can learn all the techniques you want, and you could think there's a formulaic way to approach mixes. And whilst you probably have a system that how you approach, and I'll have my own system. There's no one way to do it. I could give you the same files that I mix, and we'd have two completely different mixes, and neither of them are right. Neither of them are better than each other. They are my opinion, your opinion, the artist's opinion in those things. And that's just such a joy about mixing. It really, for me, the reason I kind of got into it was it marries the two, a creative and a technical side that I really enjoy. It's not purely technical. It's not purely artistic. It is a real mix of both. And that's just a place that my kind of brain is happy to sit in. Yeah. I'm not in either camp completely. I'm down the middle, and that's where I find joy.
I love that. So on that note, how did you get started? What kind of drew you to it? What did your first mix sound like?
Oh, okay. Well, my first mix is terrible, absolutely terrible. And as everyone should be, I'd be surprised if anyone mixes something incredible from the outset. But I'm like a lot of mix engineers, and a lot of engineers in general, and producers, started doing the whole band thing when you're younger. You pick up a guitar in your teen years, start a band and think, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to be a rock star. And then you got to figure out a way to get your music out there. So I started learning how to record at home. Had a really crappy old computer in a shed, and I had my mum's old hi-fi speakers, which I've still got as speaker stands today. That they're not plugged in, but those were my kind of speakers to learn on. And everything was awful. It sounded rubbish, but just the joy of being able to have an idea in my head and play it and put it down and create something was really, really cool to me. And I think through that process, I kind of enjoyed the whole recording side, the whole trying to do producing and stuff. I went to university for music production at Leeds Met in England, and it was a very broad course. So we did lots of different things like production, mixing, recording.
Awesome.
There was other things like composing, for film and things like that. It was very broad, and I kind of left feeling like, what the hell do I want to do? I had even less idea going into leaving university than I did going in. I ended up getting an internship at a recording studio in London called the Church Studios, which is Paul Epworth's studio, and he's recorded Adele and amazing other bands and artists, and that was amazing for me. I was in there for 2 months basically every day, unpaid, but I was doing 10, 12-hour days, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever for the first couple of weeks. And then after about 2 months of doing that, I was like, how do these guys do this job day in, day out, 12-hour days all the time, don't kind of see their family, don't see their friends that much. And that kind of got me thinking, like, is this the route I want to go down? I don't know if it's a self-awareness thing I had, or a kind of, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted more from life than just it to be my career. I wanted to have a balance. I wanted to think about the future and, family and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where I kind of started digging into mixing. It was the thing I thought I was worst at as well at the time. So I really invested in, education and improving as a mix engineer. And I grew to love it. And I was like, actually, this is something I could do on my own time in the comfort of my own home, still make music, still be creative, but doing it how I want, and not really having to deal with the kind of social side of having people in the studio, having to, cater to other people's needs. I could work by myself, send it off to somebody, get all the notes, and then work on it again, and that kind of, again, I think that's why it really resonates with me, that just, I could be a bit of a hermit with it, get on with it, but still be creative, and then collaborate virtually. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way to say that's kind of how I ended up, being a mix engineer.
I like it. And I think that's really instructive. I mean, a lot of people, when they find their ultimate, like, eventual career, they've tried a lot of different things, especially in music, because there's so many different hats you can wear. And that's like one of my buddies became a tour manager, and it's because he was an artist, and then he didn't really like the studio, but he loved being on the road, but he was a little bit more organized and didn't really like partying. It's like, boom, you're a tour manager. That's your lane. And like on my end, I actually didn't love like always being on the road, for the same reasons. I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna miss another holiday with my family. And it's like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Is like every single important event, I'm just going to be gone on the road at a hotel bar, And I'm sure it would be very different if I was playing my own music, but like playing other people's music, still fun. But anyway, like what you're saying, mixing is a really unique blend of, you fill yourself up creatively, but you also are able to set your own hours. You can set, you can temper your own creative inputs and outputs in really cool ways. But it's very difficult. And so that's kind of the challenge. I'd love to dig into a few parts of kind of that journey before we go deeper into mixing. Being an intern, I know that a lot of people, like I see it on the audio engineer subreddit and stuff like that. They think like, okay, that's my path. I get an internship with a big name, and then a big artist, and then it advances. Could you spread a little bit of like what that really looks like? What is your day? Like obviously the long hours, but it's so easy to be like, I can handle long hours. I'm in my 20s, like whatever,
Yeah, it's so true. I think a lot of people, myself included, thought this is the way you do it, and it was the way you did it for decades. It was you go to the studio, you become a T-boy, and you stay there for a couple of years, and then if you're lucky, you get to assistant engineer because some guy didn't show up that day. Yeah. And if you're lucky, you did a good job. And it was that whole thing that we'd all heard before. So I was like, this is what I need to do. Left university, managed to get that internship, and I think I was only meant to be there for a week or two. And obviously in a studio that amazing and with a producer that amazing, I was like, can I just stay? And like I just said at the end of each week, can I come back next week? And they were like, yeah, sure, because they weren't paying me, and I was just another guy, to help out and do things. And on the weekends, I was working in a pub as well, so I was doing 10-hour days, Saturday, Sunday, just to get the money. Right. But yeah, the non-glamorous side of it was I was living in West London. It took an hour and a half to get to the studio every day. Wow. It took an hour and a half to get back. And I had to leave the studio at like 9-10 o'clock if I wanted to get the last tube home, to get home in time. And one time I was like, sod it, I'm going to stay around because it was a big session. I was like, I'm going to stay around and just show my face and be here and do whatever I can. And then I ended up leaving at midnight, having to get 2 night buses to get back home. It was like a 3-hour journey.
Oh my gosh.
Fell asleep on one bus and missed my connecting one. And, so that's all of the kind of stuff you have to think about on the outside of the studio. Inside, it was just a lot of standing around, just waiting to be helpful, not being in the way, not kind of, I was basically just silent the whole time unless somebody asked for an opinion or they needed help doing something or they needed coffees or food or whatever. I was that guy. It was like, cool, it's lunchtime. Elliott's going to go, what do you want from the shop? And I'd go, or what do you want from the sandwich place? Yeah. And that was essentially what it was. But in that process, obviously I got to be in the room, experience how these people worked and kind of peer over the shoulder of the engineer as he's tweaking this massive 84 channel Neve console and just, I was drooling over all the gear. Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't as glamorous as I think a lot of people hope it kind of is in studios. And I'd say, even for seasoned engineers, it's not glamorous. Like we say, it's 10-hour, 12-hour days. You don't stop until the artist is really happy.
Yes.
You're not on the kind of clock watching, it's 8 o'clock, we'll all go home now. It was like, until the song's done, you're all there really. And yeah, it was just that whole side of it. It was exciting and being there, but after a couple of weeks, I was like, I'm drained, and it's just, I don't see myself doing this as a future career. I really think you have to be a certain type of person to commit to that lifestyle.
Sure.
And you have to really, really want it, and you have to really, really love it. Much like touring musicians have to love what they do, and you can't half-ass that. You can't half-ass the studio life as well.
I like that. In terms of how you give an opinion in that kind of stakes, how do you go about, like, so they turn to you and you go, what do you think of the reverb? Like, how do you navigate that? Because I feel like some young guns would just be like, it's crap, like throw on a plate, like you got to do this. How do you subtly give the opinion so that you stay in the studio and get called back the next day?
I'm probably the complete opposite of that. I'm far too diplomatic and nice, and I'm like, oh yeah, sounds great, cool, done. And just not wanting to piss anyone off, not wanting to step on any toes. And I think that's probably why I quite like working in solitude and having, my own time to work on things. And if I need to express an idea or an issue with somebody, I've got time to type it up or leave a voice note or something. It's not a face-to-face interaction. I've always been kind of against, I'm not very assertive. So putting myself out there and giving my opinion, I didn't always find too easy, So yeah, if it was ever something like, yeah, what do you think of that? I was like, yeah, cool. Sounds great. You're the experts. I'm the lowly T-boy. Whereas you're right. I think other people, on the other hand, would be more, I want to show them, I know what I'm talking about. I want to show them that I'm amazing at this. And then you could easily step on some toes, piss the wrong person off and not be invited back. So it's a really, really hard gig to balance and get right.
Yeah. Especially with the stress. I can only imagine just like, it's like you have to go back to the studio the next night after falling asleep on your night bus and then like something goes wrong and you got to stay.
Yeah.
You got to stay composed.
Exactly. You got to stay calm, and it's always going to be the lowest person's fault as well in the studio. Again, it seems to be the kind of ethos and mentality that people have. Like whoever was the lowest person, and if they had an involvement, it's their fault. It's never going to be the top dog. And rightly or wrongly, that is how it is. So yeah, you have to have a kind of a fortitude and an attitude of being like, I'm in this for the long haul, and if I eat enough shit, then I'm going to get where I want to be. So yeah, I think that's the kind of person you have to be if you want to stick that out.
I like it. I mean, it's so weird hearing these stories because it feels like almost a bit of the 70s and 80s is still like in this little bubble. That it doesn't really exist that much in the music industry. Like most of us are recording ourselves at home or have homies, and it's like a totally different vibe than that. But then there's still this little bubble in the middle. It feels like a time capsule.
That's exactly what it's like. It is just the old guard kind of way. And as much as people are doing different things and making amazing music now in our respective home studios and things like that, you can do amazing things. There's still that studio etiquette and vibe that people want, and that I think labels assume is what is needed to make an album amazing.
And what makes them different. Like we're not a home studio thing. We've got the 88 channel Neve.
Exactly. Like this is how you do it. And this is, this is the only way to make a record. And I don't want to make it sound like the guys at the studio were amazing. Paul Epworth is amazing. Like all of that they were great. But the whole, I think it's the same in any studio you go to. That is the expectation, that you do these long hours, you work as hard as you can, and like you take as little breaks as you kind of can. But yeah, it's definitely a different way, and I'm so glad that there is the opportunity for musicians and artists to make in home studios. And I mean, you're probably the same. When we first started out in recording audio at home and stuff, the quality of equipment wasn't there. No, and it was just that is a lot different now. The kind of Apollos that you can get, the microphones you can get are incredible, and that's all you need at home now to make a good record.
Totally. It was like around 2014, 2015 where I started being like, oh, okay, this sounds good now.
Yeah.
Like where it's, I got sound toys, something, some right around in there. It's like, oh, okay. Like I can saturate things and it like sounds like I'm running it into gear. It's like, all right. Yep. And now we have a million tools, but like it was, it hasn't been that long.
No, actually it really hasn't. And everything's getting cheaper and better. And
totally.
the knowledge is out there now as well.
Yes,
Like
yes.
20 years ago, you had to dive into, like you say, the forums and stuff, and you'd get some
Gear
crusty old guy. Yeah, be like, oh, this is the only way that you can record an acoustic guitar, and you're like, oh crap, okay, I've got to get a
listen to them.
U87. Yeah.
No, there was so much crap on Gear Sluts of just nonsense, but said so confidently, and then a whole bunch of other posters that are all backing it up. I'm like, I guess I have to buy that really expensive Neumann microphone, otherwise it's impossible to record vocals.
Yeah, they can't all be wrong, surely. So that must be the way to do it. Yeah,
exactly. Its own weird little hive mind, but yeah, I'm with you. I also want to ask, did some of that in-person studio experience, and this would probably apply to your schooling, but help you with digitally modeled versions of the same gear, like getting on a Neve console or seeing the way that they were manipulating that or outboard gear or whatever, and then you see the virtual version? Is there does that pay dividends?
I think it did in a way. I saw again how the high level productions were made, and it was with a lot of expensive outboard gear and a lot of cool stuff. Interestingly, because of the way the church studio is set up, the Neve console is in the live room. It's like one big room.
Whoa,
and
I didn't know that. I've seen pictures of this. I have.
Yeah, you would have seen. Yeah, and so they've got the cloud above the Neve console to kind of contain it. But a lot of the time, the engineer would be on headphones, and he would actually pull up the UAD Neve channel strip, tweak it and headphones whilst they're playing, and then apply it to the console after the fact. So it was a very cool way of seeing them utilize both kind of modeled and actual analog gear.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures. I have seen this before.
Yeah,
that's a really cool point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredible place, and they've got below. So that's on the second floor. Below that, they've got an SSL room with I can't remember which model it is, but they've got the Asperger's speakers as well, and it's a much more modern kind of mixing room. So they had the best of both worlds. They had this really incredible space where you could record, and everyone was in the same room together, and it's a real vibe. And then they had the more cleaner, sterile, more up to date kind of studio below. So it kind of catered for every artist that came through. But yeah, it was cool to see them just how they would use the gear in their space. I think around that time though is also where I kind of swore off ever getting into outboard gear, because I saw I was a guy taking recall notes, and taking all the photos and helping them catalog it all. And I was like, what is
that? Just in case somebody that might pass by somebody, they're like, what is recall note?
Yeah. So when you're recording in a session, you've got all your outboard gear, you're setting everything up, putting all the settings how you like, and you record or mix or whatever it is you're doing. At the end of the day, after the artist leaves, you need to take a record of where all the settings were on that piece of gear, because you might not be coming back in that studio tomorrow. It might be somebody else who comes, twiddles and changes everything again. So everything needs to be documented and captured so that when they come back to record or mix again in the same space, they can set everything exactly how they had it before. Which is such a long-winded process and a very difficult thing. A lot of the gear didn't have indented knobs, so it was a real guessing game as to where, you would put your mark and stuff. And that's kind of where I got the idea. I was like, I just want to be in the box. I don't want to faff around ever. We always hear again on the forums that, you need the gear, you need the outboard stuff to do great mixes. And especially this is what was being kind of pushed 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Whereas now, you've got big mixers like Andrew Sheps, who's one of my mixing idols. He's just in the box on a pair of headphones, and he makes amazing mixes. So it's all about the knowledge, not the gear, but knowing how to use the gear and what is appropriate for different sound sources is a massive part of being a mix engineer. And I think definitely seeing different tools being used in that aspect in a live situation did help me kind of internalize that and understand it a bit better.
What's good, guys? Scuba Dubert here for the Love Music More podcast, and I want to let you in on a little secret. One of my favorite new things, Minuendo lossless earplugs. So these are really, really, really cool. I've got two of them here. It comes in this awesome sweet box, but it comes with a bunch of little goodies like carrying case, tether, cleaning tools. But the real tech is in these little tiny lossless earplugs. My favorite thing about it is One, you can swap out any of the included tips. So depending on the size of your ear canal, we're all built different. You can get a nice, comfortable fit. But there's also this little lever on these adjustable versions that can go from 7 to 25 decibels of cutting. So depending on if you're listening to nu metal or jazz, you can just hit the little lever and adjust in real time. And I think that's really, really cool. You know, for the longest time, I was listening in those awful foam earplugs, and it makes the music sound like that. It just cuts off all of those high frequencies. And so I was always tempted to sneak them out a little bit. Oh, it's my favorite song. No earplugs. And then you get hearing damage. You have tinnitus after the show, and then you come back, you want to work in the studio, and guess what? Your ears aren't right. And that's why I love Minuendo, because you can just pop these in and have full fidelity with these lossless earplugs. There are two different versions. One is adjustable with the little lever, and then this one is fixed at 17 decibels. So check out Minuendo, MINUENDO.com, or you can search them on Amazon and find Minuendo earplugs today. Get cracking. I love that. Great answer. Yeah, and it is it is hilarious, especially because you don't. People just think, oh, okay, like I used one thing and I set my knobs like a guitar amp, and you go, you take a picture of the guitar amp and that's done. It's like in the studio, sometimes you route this thing into that thing, into that thing, into that thing, and you got to keep track of this like permutation of this beast that you recreate because you have these patch bays and
all of it needs to be noted down. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I've been to the Audio Engineering Society show in New York a couple times, and they to try to solve that problem, they have these digitally controlled outboard gear where you can press a button and it switches all the knobs. But that also kind of feels like a little bit like a solution running after a problem, where it's like, why don't you just do you really need to?
That was the final nail in the coffin for me. Is I a few years ago, I think it's probably about 5 years ago, I was like, oh, maybe I should get like an outboard compressor for my mix bus. That'd be really cool. And I was like, oh yeah, but then you're going to have to recall it every time you want to pull up a mix. I was like, okay, maybe I'll get one of those ones that's digitally controlled by a plugin. So, I'll do that. I'll route the audio out. And I was like, but then I'm just tweaking a plugin. Like,
totally.
So what's the point in having the box that costs $2,000? And I think that was really where I just went, that's it. I don't want outboard gear, because if the box does something slightly different, is it better? Or is it just slightly different? In my opinion, it's probably just slightly different. Others may disagree and think that they need the outboard gear to get their sound, and that's fine. I'm not here to argue their case, but for me, I can get the sound I'm looking for completely in the box. I've got a really well kind of thought out template that I've been developing for years with certain choice pieces of plugins and things in certain places so I know if I want a sound, I can reach for a certain plugin or a certain fader and push it up, and it will do that for me. Much like old studios were set up, with tons of outboard gear, and they would have things already patched in, ready to go when they're mixing. I've kind of adopted that, but just strictly with plugins.
Awesome. I'd love to dig into that. And on that point, though, with guitar, my primary instrument, I can spend $1 million on pedals, and I like pedals, and I sometimes buy pedals, and $1 million on amps, and I like amps, and I have an amp. But it's like, if I buy stuff that's in the box, I can use it on anything easily.
Yeah.
And having a guitar pedal and patching in it, that's fine. I do that sometimes. But it's like, if I just get a cool bit of software, it can translate across everything I do.
Yeah,
it's flexible.
You can use it multiple times. Whereas, like I use distressors all the time in my mixing.
Cool.
I don't know how much they cost, but if I was, to have a wall, I'd need probably about 10, 20 distressors in my studio to do what I do in the box. And it's the same for you with your guitar pedals. Like, okay, I could buy that one pedal, but I could only use it once on this one audio. I can't use it across my mix or on these 10 different things. So it's a convenience thing at this point. The sound doesn't matter anymore. The sound quality isn't an issue.
It's come up to par.
Exactly, it's come up to par now. So I think for ease of use and recallability, and just I can switch from one project to the next. I can work for an hour. Think, all right, I'm losing this, or I've kind of not vibing with this. Switch to another project, and it takes me 2 minutes for my computer to load. That's it.
And think about the value that you're getting from that, being able to put that down, pick this up, pick that back up. Already that jump in audio quality, rather than I have to grind it out and get to the end because I don't want to have to patch everything again. That already is going to sound better than the outboard gear. Just the human mental shift. Yeah,
exactly. And you can be in that be in the right creative space, and then when you feel like you're losing it, you can stop and you can come back to it again when you feel like you're in the right creative space. Like you're saying, otherwise we would be having to force ourselves to finish the mix no matter what, because I'm going to have to recall all this gear anyway. So it's just a great time to be a mix engineer or just somebody creating music themselves in a home studio. The quality of gear that's available in plugin form is amazing. So just it's not a barrier anymore to entry.
I'd love to talk about templating and kind of the way that you're applying some of those classic studio techniques to the way that you build your sessions. First of all, what DAW do you prefer to mix in?
So I'm in Logic, and I've always been in Logic. I think I started in Cubase LE. That was the free thing I had on my old Windows computer. But as soon as when I went to university, got a MacBook Pro, got Logic, and I've been on it ever since. So yeah, I've used Studio One. I've started dabbling with that a little bit more recently, which is cool. It's got some cool, what do you call it? Quirks to it, things that are quite helpful for mixing. But yeah, Logic is like an extension of me at this point. So yeah.
I love that. In terms of the way that you kind of set up the session, has this been over time, your template? Has this been over time you're adding things and kind of perfecting it?
Yeah, definitely. It's been something that, again, I don't know when I first made a template. It's like 5 or 6 years ago I made my first one. And I've just been tweaking it ever since. As I learn new skills, new tools come out, I try things. And if I find myself doing something mix after mix, I'm like, well, I should just put this in my template then. So I'll make a note of things as I go, or a mental note, just being like, oh, I really liked how that sounded. And I could just copy it from a project where it sounded great, copy it straight in. So all the settings are there. Everything's how it was on that as a good starting point. But yeah, it's just been iterations as I go. And it's every month now I kind of update it or change it. So I've kind of got it as a year, do the year, then the month as the kind of numbers. And so I've got it all in an order. And so whatever mix I'm working on, I'll just open up my template, drag and drop the files in. And I don't have any processing on individual channels, but I do have a lot of busing, and that's how I kind of route things. And there's plugins on the buses. So I get that kind of analog tape saturation things from certain plugins at certain points. I've also got a lot of parallel channels because I like doing parallel processing as well. But yeah, it's not a cookie cutter kind of template where I put audio in and it sounds amazing, or I'm just doing the same processing as the last song. It's just a starting point for me, so I don't have to go through the whole arduous process of making aux tracks and routing audio in certain places. I just drag the tracks where they need to be, everything's good to go, and so I can just get down to mixing as quick as possible.
I like it. So like let's take, for example, just a standard arrangement. You got bass, drums, synth, guitars, vocals.
Yeah.
How are you organizing them? How is some of this stuff flowing, parallel processing? And could you give any tips to, say, somebody that's like, I've been mixing from scratch every time, I want to build a template, like where do I even begin?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, again, coming from that, working in the studio for a little bit and seeing how they set things up, it was always drums on the left. So in a DAW, drums on the top, drums, bass. I do drums, bass, drums, percussion, bass, keys, acoustic guitars, electric guitar, synths, strings, and then vocals, then backing vocals. So it all feeds down. And then I basically have all of those individual instrument groups going through their own bus. There's a drum bus, there's a percussion bus, a bass bus, etc. I don't typically do much processing or EQing on the bus. It's normally on the individual track when I get to it. But the bus is there in case I'm doing, I just need it. And it's a way to collect audio on the way to the mix bus for me. Then the way I've got it set up, I've kind of had a hybridized session from, what's his name? Michael Brower, who's the guy who mixed like Coldplay and things like that. His whole Brower-ized thing where he had the 4 different buses. And I like that kind of idea. So I've got an all rhythm bus, which takes my drums and my bass through them. Then I've got all music, which is everything that isn't drums, bass, and vocals. I've got an all vocals, which takes the main vocal and the backing vocal through there. And then I've got all effects. And all 4 of those then feed into the mix bus. And that's where everything ends up going out. The reason I do that is just because on those all buses, as I call them, so that all rhythm, all music, all vocals, I can do kind of saturation or console emulation things on there, and it just gives a nice separation between certain elements. I can do that further down the chain, on the individual buses as well, but I like to do them up there. And it's also, it's getting a bit in the weeds. I also have a sidechain thing with Soothe on the All Music bus. So I put Soothe on my All Music bus. I sidechain it to the lead vocal. And so every time the lead vocal sings, it's ducking the frequencies of the vocals out of the music bus. So essentially it's kind of creating space for the vocal to sit on top of the music. And that's just something I've been doing recently, which I love. And that happens on like all mixes. It's just in from the get-go. So I always kind of hear it. But yeah, that's generally how mine's set up. And then within each of those, I kind of have different parallel chains. So in my drums, I've got 3 or 4 different parallel compressors and distortions and reverbs, so I can kind of blend them in as I want. Same with the bass, I've got parallel distortion and a parallel chorus for some widening. And then the vocals, I've got parallel distortion, parallel compression, and parallel widening as well.
Nice.
So again, it's just on a fader down here. I can push it up and get it how I want and move on. So hopefully that wasn't too much information all at once, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I like the way that you broke it down in terms of just organizational structure. Because I think, even if a listener's not a mix engineer, I think that just being able to demystify some of this and then also just think through like logically, like what are you doing and how are you thinking about the music helps the producer, helps the musician, helps the mastering engineer, where it's like, I am thinking of it really in those 4 tracks. That's the highest level of stuff that's going to make you dance, the music that the vocals are going to sit on, the vocals themselves, and then the ambience and the effects. The effects one is interesting because I do basically everything but the effects one. So I would love to talk to you about that. See if you can convince me to on my next mix to break that out. What's the purpose of that one? Is that like in the same way to be able to create that separation or be able to like create more width or like less muddiness or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. So at first it was purely because I didn't want, it's just I don't have OCD, but my kind of wanting things to be clean. I didn't want everything to go to its own bus and then the effects to go straight to the mix bus. I wanted it to have its own thing as well.
Yeah.
But at that same point, it's really handy to, if a mix is feeling overly wet or overly ambient, I can just pull that down a bit and it's like, oh, okay, there's the space, or I can push it up.
I like it.
Or I can do things like carve out some muddiness if it's kind of, there's way too much going on. So it's just a handy way of being able to, first of all, route audio to where it needs to go. And it kind of, my brain understands where things are going to. But yeah, you can absolutely process on that bus and dip out some mids if it's getting a bit muddy, add some stereo, width on the highs if you need to get a bit more shimmer, that kind of thing. It's just super handy to have that there.
I like it. I think I'm convinced.
Yeah, nice. Give it a go. Give it a go. And you let me know if it's helped you out.
Yeah, well, I like it. And I think it's interesting too. Like, so people that mix with their effects just on the bus or whatever, like or just like on an individual track, like a snare reverb. You can only go down to 1%.
Yeah.
With this, you can go below 1% because you just pull that fader down right to that sweet spot rather than being limited by however the plugin company decided this was your minimum value.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a time and a place to put effects on a track. If that's so, like if you got a Fender Rhodes or something and you want it to be really spacey and washed out, maybe then put your reverb directly on that. But if you want to give it a bit of ambience, why not have? I've got at this point, I think there's like 10 different reverbs and delays ready to go. Cool. Starting from like a really small slap up to a really long quarter note delay, and then a similar thing with reverbs. And then I've got a same thing, but just for vocals. That's something I've started doing recently where, so because I want the vocals to have their own space and their own character, and I don't want to accidentally change the reverb for the vocal and it's changing the guitar reverb because I sent it to the same thing.
Yes.
But just having them on faders as well, I've got the fader bank in front of me, and it's just so nice to be able to sit here without using the mouse and just sit and kind of close my eyes and push it up until it feels right, and then be like, okay, there it is, and then let go. Instead of kind of being like, is it 18.5 or 18.6? Like, exactly. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
And that's such a good point too, because like when there's I mean, I've got one too. One of the PreSonus ones.
Nice.
It's always solo fader, but like I like it too because for the same reason, when you're looking at the numbers, it starts getting in your head a little bit of like, can I hear the 0.2? It might be the right thing with the 0.2, but it's like, no, you're not supposed to even be thinking about that. That's part of the wisdom of the non-digital mixing. Yeah.
Completely. And this is something I was having a conversation with a friend about yesterday. And we're just saying, obviously, we've got great tools like FabFilter Pro Q3 and things like that, which are great. And they serve such a great purpose. But at the same time, it can be quite, you're looking at it going, oh, should I really be pulling out 12 dB at this frequency? It's like, but if I shut my eyes and just did it, that's where it would end up. So like, what does it matter what I'm looking at and what the number is?
Yes.
Again, one of my favorite sayings from Andrew Sheps is like, all that matters is what comes out of the speakers. It doesn't matter how you get there or what was the process involved or what numbers. It's irrelevant. It's just, does it sound good? And we could so easily get caught in that trap of like, well, I've been told I shouldn't pull out more than 5 dB, any time on an EQ or something. And it's just like, that's just nonsense. Which is where things like the old graphic style EQs and Neve console things are just nice because the bands are already set for you. So you go, oh, is it 330 or is it 450? Or, you just select it, dip it out, boost it up. Yeah, cool. That's where I want it. And kind of move on. If you can save some mental bandwidth by just making a decision and then moving on, and you can always come back to it later. Cause again, that's the joys of working in the box and this stuff. But trying to not be visual with things, trying to just feel the music because it's an emotional thing. And, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're not here to get the award for the correct number that we've compressed the vocal to.
No. And no one's
it will
going to
serve the music better.
They'll never know.
They'll never know. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter.
And I really liked one of my things that I loved coming up as a guitarist and then going into audio is the way that guitar amps are for equalization. Is you got high, you got low, you got mid. There's not a lot going on. Does it need to be brighter? Yes. Is it too muddy? Yes. Like, it's just put yourself in that headspace, do that first, and then you can go in with the super surgical, detailed digital tools and pull out that one little resonant frequency, But
exactly.
Yeah, start like a stupid guitarist and just go, hey, bright.
Bright. I want more brightness. Cool. I want more bass. Cool. And there's a foolproof way of doing it. And at that, you step away from the whole technical, granular way of looking at things. And it is the broader picture, the musical thing. Like, do I need more presence in this vocal or this guitar? Turn the highs up then. Sounding a bit muddy, turn the mids down. Just,
Exactly. On that point, I wanted to talk about kind of the educational content that you're trying to put out there for artists, for mix engineers. What inspired you to do that, and kind of like what is your goal spreading that education so that next generation and people that are coming up don't have to go through the gear sluts difficulties on the message boards that we did.
Yeah, definitely. So it kind of was born of necessity. Again, when I first started mixing professionally, I wanted to attract the right audience and the right people. And I saw a lot of mix engineers making mixing content, thinking that would attract the right kind of clients. And whilst it can help, you're basically more likely attracting other mix engineers to your content. And so I was like, I don't want to be another one of these guys who's just giving out mixing advice, because there's a million of them out there far better than me. What I didn't see happening much in the music space is people providing kind of motivation and education for indie artists who are trying to make a career out of this thing. Whilst there are YouTube channels that do it and other things, I felt there was a gap for somebody like myself I'm not a coach, I'm not a manager or anything like that. I'm a mix engineer, and if I can help the artists that I work with make better music, it'll make my job easier. The music will do better and go further. So that's kind of the idea of where it came from. And I've just actually fallen in love with the process of doing it. The kind of feedback I get from people saying like, God, I'd never thought of that. That's really helped me out with this song I was struggling on, or I've never tried that technique, but I'll do it. And that really spurred me on to think, we have this thing of the curse of knowledge where we know what we know and we forget that other people don't know what we know. It seems obvious to us, but there is so many people who have no idea about any of this stuff. And I'd like to impart the knowledge that I've shared, and learned over these years with them. And so that's kind of what I do. Monday to Friday, I'll post every day on Instagram, whether it's a little tip or motivation or a story, something like that, to kind of help people make better music, essentially.
I like it. I love that. Yeah. And I also like that idea of the curse of knowledge. I feel like the people that are bilingual, that really helps you get it, because you're like, oh yeah, I know this other language, and then you speak it, and the other person's like, I got nothing. It's like, oh right, yeah, okay, we've got different bags.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I'm unfortunately not bilingual, but I can totally appreciate how that what is it called? It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think, isn't it? So people who don't know anything think they know everything, and as soon as you start learning more, you're like, oh god, there's so much stuff I don't know.
Yeah.
And so passing that knowledge on, whatever it is, it might seem stupid. I made a reel yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before, about putting a guitar into Nashville tuning?
Cool.
Doing the high strung thing. I'd never done it before. I've always wanted to do it, and so I thought, let me make a little reel about it. I had, I don't know, 20 comments from people being like, I've never heard of this technique before. This is incredible. Thank you so much. And then I had 20 other people going, yeah, it's Nashville tuning. We know, like, it's been around for decades. So it kind of perfectly encapsulates that gap of what I'm trying to fill. There's all people who are like, yeah, I know that already. It's like, cool. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for these others.
Sorry to interrupt this very important broadcast, but it's time for one more advertisement for myself for this podcast. What I'm asking for is for you to rate it 5 stars, share it with your friends. This is like the most important thing for this podcast to grow. So if you want to do this, you go onto the podcast screen, right? You click on the ... on Spotify. Under there, it says rate show, and you go and you click it 5 stars. If you could do that for me, that's the best way for the algorithms and all this stuff to share it out with the world. I know that it's a lot to ask, but if you could please just hit those 3 dots and then a 5 star, it would really help us out, and it helps us, get the word out and spread the love of music. So thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. And here's the rest of the episode.
Yeah. I like that. It's good to shake them off too. Where it's like, I get that you know it, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows it. And maybe you're going to learn something different, seeing somebody reapproach a technique that you already know and you think you know perfectly, but it's like, maybe you don't. Maybe there's a gap in your knowledge too.
Exactly. So more power to everyone. Just share what you know, and you'll help people, and you'll foster a community of like-minded people. And that's kind of, in this very separated social media age where, again, we're on the other side of the Atlantic, but we're able to talk to each other. That's great. And the more that we can do this and connect, I think the better the outcome for music and society in general will be. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do in my little corner of the internet.
I love it. In terms of just feeling like, because I know that you're all about creating emotive mixes for people. How do you, with all of this that we've talked about, all of the different techniques, the focus on the artist, trying to coach up artists, how do you get to that end goal? And when do you know that you're like done? When you've hit that point where it's like, this mix is speaking to me? Is it an intuition thing? Is it the artist? Is there some sort of teamwork? Like, how do you get to that point where like we've completed the journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think obviously with all of this stuff, it differs song to song, artist to artist. But for me as a mix engineer, kind of like how we said at the beginning, once something stops jumping out at me, I kind of know the mix is finished. But what I used to neglect for years was the final stage, which I've do a lot now, a hell of a lot of it, is the final automation riding with my faders here. So the mix might be technically perfect and done, like things sound balanced, things sound great, but then I'll go through kind of track by track things that need it, and I'll just push the fader, ride it at certain points and pull it back at certain points, and that's where I feel like I'm able to get the emotion back into things. And the way I try and think about it, like I've stopped being a technician and I start being an artist again at that point, where I'm playing the board, and playing the music and just pushing and pulling. And it's something, again, that the guys have, engineers have been doing for decades, and they used to do on the old consoles. And again, we've got the ease of doing it now on these fader banks that we've got. But yeah, that's how I really feel like I'm able to put my emotion and put those scene changes in and really push and pull things at the right point. And it's something I encourage everyone to try and do. I know it seems like it's another step I've got to do in the whole process, but I think you take your mix from being good to great by doing that. So that's kind of, how I push the emotion into things.
I love that. And I have one last question for you. This is the question I like to ask every guest to kind of close this out. It's a big one. So this show is called Love Music More. The segment's called Love Music Why? And that's my question to you. Why do you keep doing it? Why do you love it? What is it about this thing, just from that super zoomed out perspective, that continues to excite you?
That is a great question. It's hard to pinpoint one thing exactly, but I'm just so excited to wake up every day and come in and do it. There's, I think we all have days where we feel a bit down or we're a little bit ill or, and maybe we're not working on the project that we particularly resonate with so much. And that can happen. But 99% of the time I wake up super excited to come in here. I wake up and I'll make my coffee and I'll come straight into work. I used to kind of, when I worked in a school before years ago, I used to wake up and read and just try and start my day as slow as possible because I didn't want to get to work. Whereas now I'm like, I want to dive in and get with it. But again, it's also just been something that's been with me since I was a kid. My dad was he doesn't play any instruments, but he just listens to the widest array of artists and musicians I've ever heard. He loves everything. And he was constantly showing me things. And my older brother as well was the same. And he played music. And so it's something I've always loved. And I think anyone would have told you from the age of probably 8 or 10 that I would do something with music because I wasn't very good at much else. But like, this is where something, for whatever reason, things resonate with me. And I'm able to actually earn a living doing it, which is, again, the biggest blessing in the world. So yeah, that's why I do it.
Love it. So Eliott, where can people hire you? Where can they get in touch? Where can they ask you questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place is probably my Instagram. So Eliott Glinn Audio. Eliott is a funny spelling. It's Eliott. Glinn, Glinn Audio. And then that's the same as my website, elliottglinnaudio.com. You can check out my work. There's a contact form on there. But yeah, just come say hey on Instagram. Shoot me a DM. I'd love to chat. Again, I'm all about the community and meeting like-minded people. And whether we work together or not, I'd love to hear people's music. And if they need help with mixing tips, things like that, I'm always available to offer my time.
Love that. And I'll definitely throw that in the show description as well, so people can just easily click on that. But just in case you're driving to work or something like that, keep that in mind and go follow up my guy on Instagram.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. It's been an awesome conversation. And I hope your listeners have got something from this.
Totally agree. Really, really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll stay in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.